Welcome to Shattered Reality with your hosts Kate Valentine and Fahrusha. Prepare to have your paradigms shifted and your truths questioned. And now, Shattered Reality.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Shattered Reality. I'm Kate Valentine.
And I am Fahrusha. Today is March 29th, 2016, and we have a wonderful guest here today who's going to be talking a lot about the UFO and contactee experiences. But before we actually, we're introducing her, we're going to give you a little bit of background, Kate.
Okay, well, actually, we're really lucky to have her. Her name is Mary Rodwell, and she's got an extensive background in the abduction phenomena. For one thing, she is the founder and principal of the Australian Close Encounter Resource Network. She's also written a very fascinating book, Awakening: How Extraterrestrial Contact Can Transform Your Life. She's also the producer of an EBE award-winning documentaries, Expression of ET Contact, A Visual Blueprint, and Expressions of ET Contact, a Communication and Healing Blueprint. So, Mary, thank you so much for spending this next hour with us. You have some fascinating stories to tell us, I'm sure.
It's an absolute pleasure, and thank you for inviting me.
Well, I think one of the more interesting things is that Mary is now talking to us from Australia.
That's
Just phenomenal to me. I mean,
yeah, just through the wonders of Skype.
yeah.
And we apologize for the early hour in Australia, um, but we do it at this time of day here.
Well, the interesting thing is that we sort of more or less wonder at it, but we take it for granted that the Skype formulation will go through, whereas maybe as short as 30 years ago, this would be found to be impossible. Other than, you remember the old long-distance telephone calls, operator,
Yes.
and then what is the country's area code and all that
Yes,
stuff.
yes.
So
And it costs $2,000.
yeah. And I think what you're studying today, Mary, is sort of unbelievable as it may sound to many people. In coming years, the reaction will be, well, of course it was true. I mean, how could they have doubted it? And I think the number, like I think you, at one thing you had 1,600 abduction stories, and that was you alone. Am I correct in that?
Yes, that's right. It's now about 3,000.
Oh,
wow, wow.
That's sort of been, that's up the ante. I mean, to be honest, I think the hardest thing for me now, being so involved in it for 20 plus years, is how common it is. How many people across the globe are having these experiences, and it's almost like, everyone can see the elephant, but nobody wants to say the elephant's there.
Well, yeah, because we see different aspects of the elephant, I suppose, just like in the story. Just to let you know, and I had mentioned this to you in our correspondence on the internet, that all three of us here are experiencers of sorts, different kinds of experiences, but everyone here in this room has had an ET type experience or a UFO type experience, and more than one, I might add. But what we want to get to with you right from the get-go is, can you tell us fairly straightforwardly, precisely how you got into it? You were a nurse and a midwife, and how did that bring you to studying this?
Well, I think we all know, especially if you've had experiences and you'll have done a lot of journeying with that experience, it's almost like you get led into it from, through your life. And although I started out as a nurse and a midwife, I went into counseling because of a number of synchronous events where I found that counseling was better about prevention rather than cure, which I felt a lot of conventional medicine really is just fixing things after they've happened, whereas at least in counseling you're looking at the causes of some of illness, which is stress, etc. But what it also exposed me to in terms of all life experience, whether it was grief and bereavement or whatever, you realize that people are having a lot of experiences that traditional psychology doesn't acknowledge, or if it does, considers it an aberration. And for me, it was, people were having extraordinary things happen. They'd have a grief issue, and maybe it was mum, and they would feel or sense mum around, or, smell her perfume or something and say, am I going crazy? When really all they were experiencing was more of our multidimensional nature, which everyone on this planet has, even if it's shut down or conditioned out of them a little bit. Mm-hmm. So for me, I've always been very, if it was weird and wonderful, I always had a book on it, because I was always fascinated with the mysteries of life, right from a little child. If it was unusual or strange, it fascinated me. And I didn't actually know about the whole thing to do with abductions, contact. But synchronously, once again, a few months before my very first client that came to me, I'd read a couple of books on the subject. One was Dr. John Mack, the Harvard psychiatrist.
Oh, yes. That was a great book to have started with.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And of course, Communion by Whitley Strieber. Those were the two that I picked up because they looked fascinating. 2 months later, I thought this was really rare. A gentleman walked in my office. He said, Mary, I've heard you're open-minded for this. There's no support groups for this. Everybody just thinks you're a loony. Mm-hmm. And this gentleman proceeded to tell me about his own experiences and his family. So he would wake up with shaved areas, marks on his body. He said, but the whole family is experiencing this. And this took it to a level where it was very hard for me to dismiss, when it's one thing for one individual to say, this is my experience, but when you've got the whole family involved, then this takes it to a whole new level. And he was grounded, he was articulate. There was no question in my mind that this man was experiencing something very real. And this is something when you're working in counselling, you get this gut feeling that, mm-hmm. you know when someone's speaking their truth. And I don't care how strange it is. If it's their truth, there's a resonance to it.
Absolutely.
And there was a resonance to this, to Ellis. And from that, really, and he's actually become one of my dearest friends. And I always blame him for starting me down that rabbit hole, because I've never been able to come up for air since. But the bottom line is that 2 weeks later, someone else came in with experiences. Huh. And from that, well, the rest is history. I really wanted to provide a professional resource, because it was obvious to me with a lot of the UFO groups, good and kind as well-meaning as they are, a lot of them are, amateurs. They're not trained to offer therapeutic support. They may be able to help you with, information and the UFO, if you like, information around seeing UFOs and what color and what shape, what time, etc. But you all, as a group, will know that this is so much bigger than the UFO that you've seen.
Yes,
this
indeed.
is about us as a species and our interactions with all these, intelligences that have been interacting with us for millennia, and who are, in fact, in my view, our ancestors, because it's pretty obvious they've been working with our DNA right from the get-go. So for me, it's the big picture stuff. And helping people to get the big picture in terms of understanding their experiences.
Wow. That's fascinating, really. And it's great that people do have a resource such as yours. Because you're quite right. I mean, if you go up to the average person and say, gee, I was abducted last night and I had this really, really idea put in my head, and it's like an awakening and I'm a changed person, they're going to give you about 10 foot of distance, I think, at least, and give you the hairy eyeball and move away. So it's, and yet I don't know, I still have a little bit of trouble myself coming to terms with abductions, but I absolutely believe that people definitely experience something. I just don't know that it's necessarily alien beings. What are your feelings about that? What do you think they're experiencing?
I think it's actually, you're quite right, not just extraterrestrials. There are interdimensionals, extra-dimensionals. A lot of, those that are having experiences also experiencing spirits. angelic beings, light beings. And also, there may even be those coming from our future as well. I mean, I've come to understand that it's all in the matrix, that it's not A or B, it's actually all of it. And just depending on your lens of perception or how you wish to interpret it, is how you will interpret it. And I meet many mediums and clairvoyants, and they'll talk about their spirit guides or whatever, and then they'll say, "Oh, I've got one guide that actually looks blue and's got no hair," and I'll say, "Oh, and what do you think that is?"
Okay.
So it's, to me, it's what it's really saying is that we are opening and awakening to our multidimensional nature, which in the Western society is largely, we're conditioned or programmed out of accepting, so that it causes this conflict of realities, because you're told that, unless you can touch, feel, see it and smell it, it's not real, when every one of us intuits, senses, feels, knows things that they haven't consciously learned but have a knowing, and all of this is part of our multidimensional nature. And I think that a lot of the time the contact, or whether you call it a contactee, experiencer, abduction, is breaking down those barriers to us understanding that we are actually multidimensional, and we are interacting with all these different types of intelligences, from many different dimensions, and it's just how we choose to interpret them that is the, to me, that's how I understand it at the moment.
Okay.
Well, that sounds right to me. I know that my experiences that started as a small child have changed my life and changed the direction that I have traveled in my life. Certainly, my experiences with non-physical beings, and also having seen several unidentified flying objects. Now, whether these flying objects were from the moon or Mars or Arcturus, I have no way of knowing. Or they came from another dimension. That's not within my purview to know that. But I know, it's like the old, isn't there a movie, I know what I saw, or something like that.
Yeah.
But
you know what I always found interesting too is like we always get sort of one side of the story. Like they certainly, or whatever these beings are, know our history, know what we are, but we know so little about them, their history, how they developed. I mean, I doubt if they sprang full blown from the head of Zeus. So they must have developed from something. Did anybody ever tell you anything about the history of these beings?
Well, what's interesting, and I know we're getting into what I'm already writing about at the moment, is a lot of the new generations of children have conscious recall, not only of past lives, being on other planets, where they are very aware that the same beings that they were on those planets, visiting them and supporting them and taking them back home occasionally so they don't get too homesick, are actually explaining a lot of our history from that knowing. And these are sometimes teenagers, even children under 10, and some of the older generations that have allowed themselves to go there and will be aware they're taking to their origins and explained why they've chosen to incarnate in human form this time, to be part of what they see as a whole shift in human consciousness at the moment. And it's about our origins, that there's a lot of those adults as well as children are taken onto the craft and educated into the true origins of who they are, where they're from, and how we came to be. The children will talk about the DNA and how many different intelligences have had input into our DNA, and this is why some people will feel they're from the Pleiades, or they'll feel they're from Arcturus, or they'll or whatever, because they're resonating to that part of their DNA that has come from there, and this is giving us the clues, if we're prepared to listen to that knowing and that resonance that we have to this kind of information, even though I think the governments know far more and are not telling us. It's left to us as those that are in touch or in contact to start trusting that kind of information, because I think it has veracity.
Well, even so, as we've talked about technology with Skype, there's also a DNA technology now called CRISPR, which allows very relatively inexpensive ways to, in a sense, cut and paste sections of DNA. And you can create almost anything you want to, any chimera that you'd like to. And that's, unfortunately, it is inexpensive, and it can be done outside of, universities or government facilities that would be open to private people as well.
It's pretty scary.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, but
Well, I think we've been there before, probably in our history. But the
yeah.
interesting thing is, the indigenous tribes. Many of them will say that the gods with the little g, I will say, have come down and interacted genetically with us. The Dogon tribe in Western Africa talks about it. And some of the children will talk about the fact that our DNA has been altered. We have 223 genes in our DNA they still can't explain because they're a sideways insertion of genetic material. We also have been spliced and moved around, as some of the more whistleblower geneticists say. There is no doubt that we have been modified, if you like, from the indigenous species that we were, and we've got the missing link where we went from Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal to Homo sapiens sapiens with twice the brain size, etc. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to work out what's happened there. It's whether or not you want to go there, I suppose.
Right. Well, so
I guess we do want to go there
yeah.
today, that's for sure.
Well, I mean, even just to carry that analogy a little bit further, when you could think of yourself as like a cell phone with a proper antenna picking up the frequencies of these beings that are in different vibration than you are, and some people just have little better antennas than other people.
Absolutely.
So I think if we had this discussion 100 years from now, we'd be saying, like, and they didn't think it was possible, So if we're around 100 years from now, I mean, not personally, but...
Well, it seems to me that it's definitely a situation where life is ubiquitous in the universe. It's not just confined to the Earth, and we become like the Earth-centric people during the Middle Ages who couldn't believe that the Earth was revolving around the sun. So it's always been this idea that we're so special and we're the only planet where there could ever be life. In fact, when we grew up, we were taught in schools, as we have said before, that the rest of the suns had no planets. The rest of the stars had no planets. And I remember thinking, that's not possible. Even as a child, I knew that there were other planets, and there was no reason why there couldn't be life on other planets, or just other kinds of life that didn't even need a planet to live on, could live on a star or on a nebula somewhere. So you have done work with a lot of different individuals. Which person impressed you the most, aside from, I believe you said Ellis was the gentleman, the initial person? What contactee, experiencer, abductee story has impressed you the most? There's something you might like to share with us now, Mary.
Oh gosh, I've got such a rich tapestry because it's actually, so many people have extraordinary stories. It really is mind-blowing, the range of them. But one of the recent articles that I did, and it's to, one of the things that I've noticed is meeting a lot of older generations that have had experiences and never spoken about it all their lives, right from, I met a 79-year-old lady in Norway last year when I was doing my tour of Scandinavia. And, interesting about Scandinavia is they're very technologically advanced. You think they're a very highly civilized society, which they are. But one of the things that they struggle with, believe it or not, is this kind of experience. In fact, it's almost more acceptable to be a sexual predator than it is to be an experiencer. And I was quite worried when I went to Norway because mine is pretty out there, even for ufology, talking about a range of different things from the new generations that are coming in, etc. And I was a bit concerned about the response to my presentation in Norway, but I did it anyway. And what I noticed was a lot of people in the audience were extremely emotional, and one of them was a lady who came up to me, beautiful soul, And she was said, look, I'm 79 years old. I'm a farmer's wife. Everything you've spoken about has been my life. And she said, and I have never spoken about this to anyone before. And she said, one of the things that talking about communicating with animals, she said, I'm a farmer's wife. And she said, I call the sheep in with my mind, and nobody knew how I did it. And she said, but for me, hearing this for the first time was just an amazing thing after, nearly being 80 years old.
Really?
And interestingly, with that, I was talking to a lady who had had chronic back pain for many years. She was a teacher. She said, look, Mary, I was on opiates because I was in such pain. I was headed for a wheelchair. And when I first she contacted me, she was 66 years old. And she'd had experiences all her life. And she woke up one morning after a levitating experience with all her technology, with all the batteries flat and whatever, and said, Mary, but when I got up, I didn't need any medication. And I was feeling mobile and I couldn't work it out. And I really didn't know what had happened. And we did a regression. I do regressions, obviously, one-to-one, but also over Skype. And she lives in Melbourne. And this is a 66-year-old lady that basically thought her life was over because she was headed, as I say, for a wheelchair with her chronic back issues and degenerative back issues. We did the regression, and in the regression, she's actually taken for healing. She's taken to her planet, where she's from. She was shown that she's now going to start her mission at 66 years old. Wow. That they fixed her back because she had things to do. She also had to talk about this, and also because her family or her children and her adult children and her grandchildren were involved. And this was the start of her new life. And when she came out of it, she said, Mary, this is incredible. They've healed me because now I've got things to do. And I mean, this is 66. At 69 years old, I actually met her when I went to Melbourne to do a workshop. She came up to me and we greeted each other like long lost friends. And she said, Mary, you will never believe what I'm doing. I am under a pseudonym. I'm dialoguing with scientists. She said, I've never studied this. Chemtrails, everything to do with, what's actually happening on this planet now. I'm able to dialogue with scientists about all this GMOs. She said, I have never learnt this stuff, but I know about it. And I'm going under a pseudonym because I don't want my children to know what I'm up to. She said, I can still function at midnight. She said, because I've got so much energy.
Wonderful.
She's 69 years old, and my article is never too late. What I'm hearing is that a lot of those that have spent their life with experiences and are in their more senior years are saying, obviously, for me, there's nothing more ahead of me. And I'm saying, no, you absolutely just don't know that there's been a reason why you've had those experiences all your life, and you don't know when they're going to come calling, because this is one perfect example of someone who thought her life was over and had been fixed up because she'd got a job to do. And this is what she's doing now. So I think that's a pretty incredible story.
Yes, it certainly is.
Incredible. But so you must hear these stories all the time then. And
I do.
Do you ever meet someone who says to you, yeah, I had this experience, I've told all my friends, and half of them believe them, half of them don't. And I mean, is there any experience that's relatively open about it?
Oh, there are. And there are certain generations of them where I will get a parent writing to me and saying, look, I've had experiences all my life. My children are an upgrade. They are even more consciously aware. And actually, she said, and I know, my parents and my grandparents, my grandmother was very intuitive or whatever. So you can actually see the linkages of the genetic links, intergenerational links, and intercultural links as well, because sometimes, obviously, there'll be a mix of cultures, and you can actually see almost like they're being brought together at a certain time because of the genetic mix.
Well,
attraction.
Memories can actually be stored in DNA, and I'm wondering if a lot of the experiences are just sort of like a time DNA or RNA in this case to go off. and the person then, well, I mean, this is just a theory. It just sort of popped in my head. Like it's just sort of like a tape recorder type thing on the DNA that goes off in your mind. You think you've experienced this, but it's sort of been preloaded, which I guess begs the issue whether it actually happens or it's preloaded.
It still
It
happened,
still
yeah.
happens. Yeah. So never mind. Scratch the
I
last
am.
thing.
I have a confession to make. I am the daughter of a father who made an instrument to communicate with these other beings. He made a, um, a, a, a sort of sculpture that showed basic two-dimensional shapes, and he would activate this sculpture by striking it with a mallet, let us say, and it made a sound, but it was more the vibration of the shapes, and he believed that through this he was communicating with some others, and certainly I owe part of my history and my story to having grown up in a household that never said there's no such thing as anything
anything,
paranormal. Yeah.
And that is so important because I've met many that have been more damaged by being in a family, whether it was very, very religious, for example, or very, very scientific, and they have not been allowed to own their experiences. And I always remember one beautiful lady saying to me, Mary, even as a child, I was having these experiences, and I talked to my mum and told her, and she'd say, that's not real, that's just your imagination.
Yeah.
And she said, I lived in conflict with my realities for many, many years, not knowing what was real. So, that is, that can be a huge trauma for those that are having experiences, and for whatever reason, the parents either are not open or can't be open, or maybe even fearful of what, the child is saying.
Well, this is what I say to people who ask me, how do you be psychic? How can you become psychic? Is it just some people who are psychic and not others? And I say to them that the first thing that they have to do is allow that it may actually be real. Because if you've spent your whole life thinking that you're not psychic, and psychic functioning, psi function, actually is impossible, well, then you're not going to experience it very often. You have to accept it and encourage it. What we have for you now, Mary, is a listener of ours, a lovely lady who I happen to know, who had an experience in Georgia in 2010. Georgia, not former Soviet Republic of Georgia, but the state of Georgia in the United States. And our trustee, Bill, our Bill here, our audio engineer, is going to cue it up, and we're going to play it for you now, okay? And
I think it's about 5 minutes.
it's exactly 5 minutes or less.
And we'd love to hear your interpretation.
Yes, we'd like your take on it.
Hello.
Hello, Diane. This is Fahrusha calling from Shattered Reality Podcast. And now we have about 5 minutes to hear your story about how your trip was waylaid. So go right ahead.
Okay. At the time, it was 2010. I was living on a farm outside of Athens, Georgia. And so a couple of days a week, I would come into Athens to do errands. So this happened on one of my errand days. I had finished about half the errands. I had 2 more to go. And I was on a 4-lane highway heading back toward home. There was an intersection ahead, and the 2 errands were on either side of the highway. If I were to go left, I would go to my rental house and just check on it, because I had some students in there that were a little less than what you call tidy. And if I were to go right, I would go to the post office and pick up the mail.
Okay.
So it was kind of, I was deciding what to do, and I decided I think I should go left first. So I got in the middle turn lane, the left-hand turn lane, and there was a red light, so I stopped at the light. Now, there was traffic stopped to the right of me, 2 lanes of traffic, and then there was traffic behind me. And it's kind of important to remember that I did not go to the post office. That was not my choice.
Okay. You chose to go to the rental house.
I
Going
chose
to
to
the
go to the rental
left
house.
would be to the rental house, and to the right would be to the post office.
Exactly.
Okay.
So I looked up at the light. The light was red, of course. I looked down at the clock in my car, and it said 11 a.m. And the next thing I know, I'm driving on a 2-lane country road. I look to the left. There's some horses grazing in a pasture, and there's another pasture to the right. I have no idea where I am. Now, at this particular time in 2010, I did not have a GPS. I did not have a smartphone. So I really had no way to locate myself except to turn the car around and go back and try to figure out where I had come from.
Okay.
I was very calm. I was very collected. I pulled the car over. I turned it around. I went a few miles, and there was the post office. So I pulled off into the post office parking lot, and immediately I lost it. I started hyperventilating. My heart was racing. It was like, oh, what just happened to me? And all these thoughts were just running through my head like, well, did I black out? Am I a multiple personality? Did somebody come in and take over my body? How could this have happened? And then I looked down at the clock, and the clock said 11:04. And I said to myself, it would have taken me about 4 minutes to turn the car around and to come back and go to the post office from where I found myself in the pasture area.
Okay.
I could not have possibly turned left, because if I turned left, I would have had to go a quarter of a mile, because it was a median in the road I was turning onto. I would have had to go a quarter of a mile. I would have to make a U-turn, go through a 5-lane road, and then drive another few miles to get to the country, turn around again, and then come to the post office. That would have been minimum 10, 15 minutes of time.
And how much time had elapsed?
4 minutes.
Okay.
And I'm thinking the 4 minutes, when I thought about it, it took me about 4 minutes to turn the car around and drive back to the post office. That was probably the 4 minutes. So when my mind kind of calculated it, there was no time lapse between sitting at the light and driving in the country.
Wow.
There was no time at all that went by. So I went home. I decided to forget the errands. I'm going home. And I called a friend of mine who I knew had had some strange experiences to just, ask her what she thought. And she said she didn't know what had happened to me, but she had had 2 sightings at that same location.
Of UFOs?
Well, yes. Well, one was at night, and she saw unusual lights in the sky, so she assumed it was something that she couldn't, figure out was probably a UFO. That one, she was alone. The other sighting, she was with a friend. It was during the day, and they saw what she described it as a sausage-shaped craft moving slowly in the sky that just suddenly vanished.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So that is my story.
Well, Diane, I thank you very much on behalf of Shattered Reality. And we're going to cut away now to put this segment into our longer broadcast with Mary Rodwell. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I hope you can give me some clarity as to what happened to me.
We will try our best. Okay,
Thank
Diane.
you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Fahrusha.
Mary, you've heard this type of story many times, I'm sure.
I have. Yes, I have.
Yeah, I'm sure. What happened was the woman then with missing time, I imagine.
Well, no missing time. That's the interesting part
No
about it.
missing time.
She made a left turn. When after she made the left turn, she found herself as though she had gone down the right road to the right, but several miles beyond the post office. Now, it was as close as she could estimate it, she and the car were teleported there instantaneously. Because by the time she got the car turned around and then she reached the post office, she realized that only 4 minutes had gone by. So had she made a U-turn, had she gone down the road and made a U-turn and then taken the next jug handle up to go to the post office instead, and gone down the road past the post office, turned around and then came back to the post office, that should have taken at least 20 to 25 minutes to do all of that. Instead, she drove to the post office from beyond the post office and was there 4 minutes after she made the wrong way turn, which is physically impossible.
Yeah.
And furthermore, some friend of hers had seen some unidentified craft in the neighborhood.
Can I ask, has she had any regression over that incident?
Not to my knowledge, but she did have an out-of-body experience where she was taken up to a craft. But not I don't know that she's had a regression at all.
Because that would be a way of understanding, because what we're talking about here is, it sounds like they needed to pick her up, and that was why she felt herself going one way rather than another. And they can manipulate time anyway. So on the craft, you could be on the craft an hour, but it would appear like you've only been gone a few minutes, and they can actually manipulate time in that way, so that it would be the regression that would be able to explain exactly what occurred, and the teleporting as well. Sometimes I think that they do that deliberately just to highlight to you that you have been picked up, you can't explain it away, and it's like, wake up, guys. We are visiting you, because I found experiences on a lot of experiences, much to the misconception of the public, are usually more skeptical than the most skeptical, because they're so keen to be seen for themselves, to not mislead themselves or to appear like they're too gullible. So if anything, they can even be more difficult to convince that this is real than I don't know if you feel that way too, that sometimes you just want to look like you're being really, really careful not to get carried away.
Well, one does look for a practical or ordinary explanation of these things. One does look, well, if I saw this, pie-shaped object in the sky with purple lights or something, could it be something else? Or was I, high at the time, or whatever like that?
Okay, for those of you who have just tuned into this broadcast, we are speaking to Mary Rodwell, who is just an extraordinarily accomplished woman, author, producer of documentaries. And Mary, I'm going to let you tell the audience about the various books that you have written and the documentaries that you have made.
Okay, thank you. Well, Awakening was written primarily because I was very aware that there were not just thousands, I believe millions of people around the globe having experiences, often very frightened, feeling very isolated, often very wary of even telling their family in case their family, misinterprets, what's going on for them, and some do. So it's, who do you go to? And if you go and see someone within, psychology or whatever, are they going to believe you, or are they going to think you're crazy? All these kinds of concerns. So what I wanted to do was, all the questions that I ever got asked was like, am I crazy? How do I know I'm not crazy? How do I know if this is real? What do I do about the fear? What if my kids are having experiences, missing pregnancies, or, how do I understand this? So I wrote a book as answering those questions as a resource for those that had encounters, so that they could actually go through a process themselves of working out as much as possible, with resources as well, but also including some of the things that are not always acknowledged within ufology, the outcomes or the transformative outcomes of having this experience, which does and will ultimately change you, because it can't help but change you when you have these kinds of experiences. Because there's an awareness, a growing awareness within yourself of that there is a multidimensional reality, that you are communicating on some level with different intelligences, perhaps having downloads of information, for example. You know things and you don't know how you know them, for example.
Right.
That's a big one. It may be that you notice your psychic abilities are enhanced, that you start to see energy fields around people, or getting very interested in energy work or healing. You may find yourself writing strange scripts, or articulating an unusual language that you don't really understand but feels very familiar to you and very comforting to you. Maybe doing unusual artwork, or complex artwork, or geometry or whatever, and a sense that you're connected to other intelligences other than humans. And you may always feel you've never really belonged. You've always felt different, like you've almost been adopted by your family because you may feel very different to them. And the sense of a mission. I've got something to do and I really don't know what it is, but all these kinds of feelings, and you don't know what to do with them. This is all part of the shift. And when I say it changes your life, it is transformative, because often many lose interest in things that they used to be interested in, such as materialism. They may change their diet. They may want to have more holistic lifestyles and live more simply, for example. This seems to be very common to having some form of experience, whether it's abduction, contact, having these kinds of encounter experiences, shift the whole reality spectrum. So it is life-changing, and it's one you can go into denial over and try and suppress, and you may be able to do it for a while, but ultimately it gets harder and harder to do that. So you either decide to own your reality and realize that you can manage both, as long as you begin to understand it. So my book is about helping you through that process. If you've got no one there to help you, it talks about all of this. And it talks about the cases of people that have had the experiences. How did they deal with their fear? How did they deal when they were aware of this? How did they come to terms with, the fact that they may be having it and others don't understand? So who do they talk to? Who do they resource? So it's that kind of process book. The second book that I'm writing is really more about what I think is the big agenda. And there's many agendas and many programs for sure. But one of them seems to be what I call an upgrading of humanity in terms of their awareness and consciousness itself. And an awakening is the name of my first book, because that's what it is. It's almost like you've been asleep. And as you have these experiences, it awakens you to a whole new, broader, multidimensional experience. And so it's like you suddenly realize that reality isn't what you believed it to be, that reality has many layers to it, if you like. And it can be confronting, and it can be scary. And if other people don't want to hear it, it's very hard because you get isolated. So it's all those things. But with the children, they have conscious recall. They will talk about the beings that come and visit them. They will actually talk about them as friends, or or their angels, or their guides, for example. They'll often talk about their past life memories of being on other planets. They have conscious recall. And why it's not all about the children, but it's certainly about a lot about what the children say, because one of the reasons I give it a lot of credentials is because the children don't read books on this. They don't watch talk shows. Their information has a purity and a clarity that as we get older, we get programmed out of our experiences like that. As a 9-year-old told me, Mary, when you go to school, they program you out of your light, is the way that she explained what happens.
Wow.
And we all know that we're conditioned into a 3D world. We are conditioned out of that because it's not okay, unless you're an indigenous person where it's still acknowledged as being okay. It's not okay in the Western technological scientific world. But these children will talk about why they've come, what their mission is, and it's profound. some of the things they talk about going up on spacecraft, what they learn on spacecraft. They'll talk about using brain waves, as an 8-year-old told me, with other children like himself, some of his school friends, plus other children he said that were not human. And I said, how do you know that? And he would say, because their eyes are different. And we all used our minds, and we would learn things about the origin of the species and very complex things. And I was filming him saying this, and I said, complex, can you tell me some of the things you learn? And he said to me very calmly, I'm sorry, but it's too complex for you to understand. So that put me in my place, well and truly, you know.
I have a couple of further questions for you. One regarding the fear, not of being exposed as an experiencer, but what I experienced at some point, the raw terror of losing control in an experiencer setting. And what do you speak to that in your book, The Awakening?
Absolutely. I mean, certainly in Awakening, it's what do you do about the fear? And also to understand that often the fear is based on the unknown, not the known. Because when you have a visitor coming in or visitors coming into your room at night, that in itself is pretty terrifying. And it's understandable that anyone will go into raw terror at that point. But often it is because they don't know what's going to happen. They don't know, whether, what they're actually going to do. The whole thing around the unknown is part of that. So when I work with someone who has that kind of terror, and it may be from even when they were a small child rather than adult interactions, by the way, it may be as a child that they haven't understood what's going on, and understandably, if something's coming in your room and it's taking you somewhere and you don't understand that, one of the things that the chapter on fear is about is what did other people do when they were faced with that? How did they deal with it? How did they manage it? Especially, when they, if they've got children that are going into the fear. So all the strategies that they would use, but primarily with adults, if fear is the big one for them in hypnosis, it's a really good way of finding out exactly, okay, so something terrifying, you feel something terrifying may have happened, but you don't know. Let's go there. Let's find out what it is that scared you. And it's often the opposite to what they think. They will find themselves maybe having a procedure, but then they would find out what that procedure was for, and it may be a healing procedure. It may be collecting genetic material, and you would say to them, so what is that about? And the understanding behind it, including one of the questions that I also ask is there any consent there on any level? And some of them will say yes before I came here. Does that make you feel any better? Not necessarily. Sometimes yes. Okay, I get it now. I get, because I was one of them, they say to me, and I've undertaken to come on a mission to be in human form because I'm assisting with this program. And it completely changes the way that they will understand that experience. 180-degree turn because they've understood it. It's like if you show somebody having an appendectomy and they don't know what the appendectomy is, they're going to be traumatized. But if you say, look, if you don't have that procedure, you're going to die because that is going to cause your death. How do you feel about that? Oh, well, okay, fair enough. I get it, So often that's what needs to happen. For some, once they know that, and I talk about this in the book, that, somebody having a terrifying experience, and one of them was about a missing pregnancy with a lady, and she realized that the reason that this child was taken was a deal she'd done with these beings, and it completely changed her anger and her trauma from understanding to, from this total anger and frustration and denial of everything. In one session, she had a complete reframe. So, it really is often because we don't understand and we go into fear. And part of my work has been helping people to come to a place of understanding, however that understanding, needs to happen for them, and however ultimately they choose to interpret that understanding.
Well, that's a wonderful explanation. And just to add something from my point of view, having been multiple experiencer and having been terrified out of my wits at times, I can say at this date in my life that it has changed my life, and not for the worse, for the better on some level, though the experiences were very terrifying to me.
And I actually talk about it as a modern day, the UFOs was a modern day shamanic experience, because the shaman in previous times had to transcend their fears to be able to operate as a shaman in a multidimensional reality. So they literally have to face all their human fears to go into that other awareness. And I feel in a way it's almost like that's what it is for those that have a fear to transcend. Then they can operate in a multidimensional reality, because they've got past those human fears that we all have, and often we're generating them because it's because of an unknown. And to give you an example of a gentleman who was terrified of the eyes, he said, Mary, every time I see those big eyes, I go into absolute, paralyzed with fear. He was fine with all his other experiences, but the eyes got to him. And I remember saying, well, do you want to find out what happened? Because I said, what do you think happens when you see the eyes? Oh, I think they're going to take me over. So I said, well, do you want to find out what happens? And he was brave enough and courageous enough for me to facilitate that. And so we got him gradually bringing the eyes towards himself. And it was, you could see his body language getting more and more terrified as these eyes were getting closer and closer. I said, look, you're all right. The eyes are coming closer, but you're still okay, and they come a bit closer, you're still okay. Then all of a sudden, his whole body relaxed. And I said, well, what happened then? Did the eye take you over? He said, He said, no. He said, as it got closer, it was actually giving me information. So he was gaining information from that procedure as the eye came closer, it was downloading information into him. It wasn't doing anything else other than that. And once he realized that, all the fear went. It was because he didn't understand.
Indeed. Well, I was going to say that working with the fear is very important, and you had mentioned that you do experiencer workshops. Do you have them across the world, or mostly probably in Australia? But do you have any plans to visit the United States or Canada with these experiencer workshops in 2016 or 2017?
It's quite possible in 2017. There is a possibility at the end of the year in the US, but as yet it hasn't been finalized. Yes, I actually love doing workshops, because through those it's amazing the amount of growth, understanding, and connection that can happen through workshops itself. I mean, I enjoy the presentations, but my main role, I feel, as a therapist and as a facilitator is to help people along on their journey with understanding, and that gives me the greatest joy. And it's amazing, from even one workshop, I'm doing one in a couple of weeks' time on the Sunshine Coast here, and what is brilliant is that it's people connecting with one another, opening up maybe for the first time in their lives, and finding others that understand, and hearing the same thing is so validating and so empowering. And so for me, it's always the most brilliant thing to be able to do. So for me, that's my priority. And any chance I've got to do workshops, I will do them. I've done some things over Skype as well. But I am actually going to Brazil this year, to the 4th UFO Contactee Forum in Brazil, which is wonderful, talking about the star kids, because they're everywhere. But for me, primarily, it is about information, and it's about connecting people and helping people to work through and understand, how what this is all about, so that they can come to a peace and an integration, and they can grow with it. Then when you're not afraid of it anymore, you can embrace it, and you can start working with what this means to you in your life and your family. And often the only thing that it is we're afraid of judgment. We're always afraid someone is going to think, well, do you know what? It really doesn't matter what other people think. Because if they're uninformed, they're uninformed. What really matters, and this is what I say to them, is you and your experience. You are the expert on your human experience. Nobody else is, and nobody has the right to tell you what to believe and what not to believe, because it's you and it's your reality. So
Well
if I
said.
could say anything to anyone, look, you are the expert on your world and your reality. Nobody else is.
Good point.
Can you give us your website for people who want to find out more about you? Just say it so people can tune into you.
Absolutely. It's a CERN, which is www.acern.com.au. And
we-
also, sorry?
I was just going to say, and we will put this up on the blog site of shatteredrealitypodcast.com. There will be a link to your site.
That's wonderful. I'm also on Facebook, of course, as well, with a CERN. So you can and access me through either of those as well. And lots of, and I really hope that people enjoy listening to this, and to the fact that you've all been so courageous and, saying, that this is your world too, and it's everywhere. It so is part of, this big shift in realizing we're not alone.
Yes, absolutely. And we cannot begin to thank you enough for being our guest on Shattered Reality Podcast.
Yeah, just a fascinating hour, really. Thank you so much. I tend to be a little bit more skeptical than Fahrusha, but you have me quite convinced.
Well, you've had your experiences too.
Yeah, but, I deny them, so. As Mary said, if you're denying them, they ain't happening. But thank you again from Kate, too. I really, really appreciate your spending the time with us.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Have a
And
wonderful
keep us
day.
posted on your activities. We want to hear more from you. Thank you.
Oh, I will do. Thank you both.
You're
Thank you, Bill.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
And I want to thank our wonderful engineer, Bill.
Yeah, poor Mr. Bill had his ups and downs today.
But no, he's doing a great job. He had something kind of challenging to do. And I wanted to also mention that our next guest on Shattered Reality Podcast will be Andrew Chestnut, talking to us from Virginia in the United States. And he will be talking to us about Santa Muerte, Saint Death, who is usually pictured as a woman in a wedding dress, but a skeleton woman. And I had visited Merida in Mexico, which is in the Yucatan, and I picked up a little figure of death while I was there. It's a skeleton riding a motorcycle, and I may put it up on the blog, a picture of my own little muerte.
See, I don't like all that stuff.
Well, we'll find out more about
Okay.
it. We'll
Okay.
find out more about it.
All right, I like Mary better.
Okay. Don't prejudge our next guest. All right.
Unfortunately, Diane's experience was sort of lost in an electronic whirl, and Mary was not able to hear it in Australia. We did get something of her interpretation of the event, that it might have been teleportation, and just sort of a wake-up call to Diane, who experienced this, as that it was a message of some sort. And Mary also felt that there was a possibility of time manipulation. So I would also think my own personal interpretation would be, sometimes I've driven and I have a million things on my mind, and suddenly I wind up and I don't know how I even got there. And it's possible that this woman also had that type of a just mundane experience. And we'd really appreciate your opinion and your thoughts on this, and you can post it on our blog site. And you can do that by
Going to shatteredrealitypodcast.com, and you can go to the Mary Rodwell episode, which at the current time would be the first episode up, but if you're listening after March or April of 2016, it's likely to be a couple of podcasts down. on the list. So shatteredrealitypodcast.com or shatteredrealitypodcast.wordpress.com, and you can comment on the podcast there. We appreciate all comments.